I'm Jason Connolly and welcome to the Career Success Podcast. In this thought-provoking series, we dig deep to know what it takes to reach the top in your chosen industry. Every week, we conduct interviews and lead the way in conversations speaking to the biggest names in the world of business. What makes them successful? What actually defines their career success? Gain valuable insights as we dig deep into their business journey, lessons that they may have learned, find out how to overcome obstacles and challenges, and learn from the best on how to become a successful business leader and how to get to the top in your chosen industry. We'll also cover what diversity means and why it matters to have lesbian, gay, bisexual and trans role models in a wide range of industries. And why does it matter to have LGBTQ leaders? This podcast for me is all about showcasing what makes someone successful. In this episode, I'm joined by Iain Dale. For anyone that doesn't know Iain presents the evening show on LBC Monday to Thursday, interviewing some of the biggest names in the UK from the world of politics and from the world of business. Iain facilitates the conversation on key issues affecting us in everyday life. Iain is also one of Britain's leading political commentators and bloggers. He is a regular columnist for the Telegraph, Evening Standard and Iain newspaper. And for 5 years, Iain also wrote a monthly column in the gay lifestyle magazine Attitude. Iain is also a panellist on CNN Talk and CNN International and is a regular contributor to Newsnight, the Andrew Marr Show, Good Morning Britain and Channel 5's Jeremy Vine Show. Iain has won a multitude of radio awards and has actually won Radio Presenter of the Year with the Sony Award for Best Interviewer. So no pressure, Iain. Thank you so much for joining me today on this podcast. It is so delightful to have you with us.
Absolute pleasure.
I'm a big fan of yours and I listen to you all the time on LBC, and you've had a really extensive career, which we'll talk about some of your career throughout this half an hour. But one of the first questions I had for you, and I think you've mentioned it before on the radio, is about career success. What does career success look like or mean to you, Iain? Because you've been highly successful.
It's really weird because when you put it that way, I don't really think about whether I've been successful or not, because everyone has failures in their lives. I've had some, and I suppose if you look at what I do now, people think, well, yeah, he is successful at what he does. When I left university, there were two things I wanted to do. I wanted to be a member of Parliament or a radio presenter. And I've achieved the latter, but not the former. I did fight an election. I tried to do it, but the electorate fought back. And so I never made it. And I was going to say I regret it. I don't really have many regrets in my life. I would have liked to have done it, but sometimes things happen for the best. And if I had been an MP, I wouldn't have had the last 10 years on LBC, and it's the best job I've ever had. So I also very rarely look to the future. I don't think, right, I'm doing this now. In 5 years' time, I want to be doing X, Y, or Z. I don't really think like that. I've had to constantly reinvent myself over my working career. And when things go wrong, you pick yourself up, you dust yourself off, and you try for something new. And luckily, each time I've done that, it's worked out. But I have in my business life, I've been sacked from a company that I helped form. So that was a pretty shattering experience, but you recover from it in the end, even though at the time it feels like a devastating blow.
When you said that you have to reinvent yourself, in what way do you mean? Is that to move with the times, or working in the media, or working in publishing, or?
Well, I think when one job comes to an end, and I've had several, my two first jobs effectively had a limited time span. The first one, I worked for a Conservative MP in the House of Commons after I left university. And that's never a job that you're going to stay in for very long. This was in the 1980s. I was paid £6,000 a year. Can you believe?
That was Patrick Thompson.
That was Patrick Thompson. But even in those days, 6,000 was a pretty poor salary to live on if you were living and working in London. And so that was in 1985 that I started that. And I knew that once the general election was over, that was when I should go. So I did. Had nothing to go to. But I applied for a job with the ports industry as a lobbyist, trying to lobby the Thatcher government to get rid of a piece of employment legislation called the Dock Labour Scheme. And I knew that once that was successful, and I didn't know if it would be at the time, but once that was successful, that would be the end of that job. So on each of those occasions, I had to sort of reinvent myself. And when I got sacked from the Waterfront Partnership, which was a transport consultancy and a conference organising company, I'd had a big falling out with a guy that I went into business with. I mean, I literally was out of a job, had not got a clue what I would do next. So I started my own business, a political bookshop. And then 7 years after that, it became clear that the market conditions for bookshops were getting worse, with Amazon on just starting. The congestion charge came in. I thought, I can't renew the lease here. So again, I had to take that online, but it was never quite the same. And that was about the time that I started to try to stand for Parliament. So every 5 years or so, I've had to think, okay, well, I need to do something different now. Luckily, on each occasion, I found something which I've enjoyed doing. Virtually every job I've ever had, I've enjoyed. I've never really, I don't regard what I have now as a job, because it's a sort of slightly portfolio career.
Right.
But you take the opportunities that come. Sometimes you have to make your own opportunities as well.
I agree with that. I went to a school that was in one of the bottom secondary schools in the country, I think in the 5 worst schools, and it made me have no passion for education. I actually went off at 16 and was busking in Covent Garden performing magic. And I've also, like you, had many knockbacks over the years. I've been sacked for 2 jobs actually. I was a Met police officer, didn't enjoy my time there at all. I found the police to not be a very positive environment. I had a very hard time there actually for being gay. And do you think, I think the knockbacks that I've had throughout my career have really, every time, don't get me wrong, there's been times where I felt like I'm on the floor, but I've come back stronger fighting. Obviously, you've stood for election 3 times. Do you think these knockbacks that you've had throughout your career have been quite defining to you, sort of moving on to the next thing and strengthen you?
They do strengthen you. I mean, in the end, you regard these things as threats or opportunities, and it's so easy to, particularly when you've been sacked from something. And I mean, I can go into the reasons for that if you want, but it was basically that my business partner's wife came into the company, and she basically tried to want to get rid of everybody that worked for me, and I resisted that. But in the end, who is he going to choose, his wife or his business partner?
Difficult one.
And it was a really traumatic period. And but I mean, you either let it sort of overwhelm you, and you think your working life has come to an end, or you think, okay, well, it's happened, there's nothing I can do about it. You pick yourself up and you start again. And when I lost the election in 2005, I've actually only stood for 1 election. You just said 3.
Oh, I thought it was, sorry, I thought it was 3 elections.
No, I mean, I've done, I when I was at university, I sort of was a paper candidate in 1 or 2 council seats, but as for a parliamentary election, I've actually only stood once. I tried to stand in 2010, but didn't get selected. So when I lost in 2005, I kind of knew I was going to lose in the last few months. So that didn't come as a surprise. But in the end, I thought, okay, well, what do I do now? And then there was a Tory leadership contest, and my friend David Davis was going to stand. So I rang him up and I said, well, do you fancy a new chief of staff? And he said, yeah, come on board. So I did that for 6 months, but of course he didn't win that. Everyone had expected that he would. And in that case, I would have then no doubt continued to work for him. If he became prime minister, I would have gone into Downing Street and so on. But he didn't. So 6 months later, again, another point where I thought, what do I do? And I actually took 6 months off to think about what I wanted to do. And in the end, started up an internet television station, which was kind of 10 years ahead of its time. That lasted a year. And again, so I thought, well, I'm going to leave this.
I'm sensing a pattern here, Iain.
It's not well. The way I'm talking, it sounds as if I've sort of gone through loads of things, and each time I've failed at them. But it wasn't quite like that. And so I then started a political magazine called Total Politics, and another publishing company, and stayed with that for, well, I left that 2 years ago, so that lasted quite a long time. And then I had a period where I'd always wanted to be a radio presenter, but it never quite happened. And then in 2010, it did. And I've been on LBC now for 11 years, nearly 11 years. And for a time, I was running the magazine, the publishing company, and doing a daily show on LBC. But in the end,
Wow.
something had to give. So I decided to leave the publishing world 2 years ago and concentrate on broadcasting.
Where did this passion for politics come from? Because it's been throughout your whole career. It seems to have been there from day dot, pretty much.
Politics is a bit of a virus. Once you really get into it, it never quite leaves you. And even now, I'm 58 now, and I have given up any political ambitions. But even now, a lot of people say to me, "Oh, you're going to stand again?" And I always say, absolutely not. And I do mean it. But from time to time, the virus comes back. And in 2017, the MP for Saffron Walden, which was where I was brought up in Essex, he stood down. And I seriously thought for 24 hours, shall I go for this? Because I think I would have stood a good chance of being selected. It was right just before the election. And in the end, I wrote down on a piece of paper all the advantages and all of the disadvantages. And I came up with 4 advantages and 15 disadvantages. And I couldn't let my heart rule my head, because my head knew that I shouldn't do it. Because I'd be giving up a really well-paid job in broadcasting to effectively go into a job where I doubt whether I would have become a minister because I was too old. No one, I mean, nowadays, the job of an MP is not what it was when I worked for an MP in the 1980s. And in the end, I just thought, I can't do this. I can't put certainly my partner through it. And I said to him at the point, I said, if I had become an MP in 2005, I'm pretty sure we wouldn't be together now, because the pressure on an MP's family is enormous. And I think politicians they go into it for the right reasons, but there is a degree of ego about it. And I think they can get carried away with things, all the attention, all the media attention and all the rest of it. And I'm not going to pretend that I wouldn't have been as susceptible to that as anybody else. My mother, when I announced in 2010 that I told to her that I wasn't going to stand again, she cheered, because she said, you could have got caught up in the expenses scandal. Now, I think I'm, as Tony Blair would say, an honest kind of guy. But a lot of people who did get caught up in that were completely honest people. They'd just been given really bad advice by the House of Commons Fees Office or whatever, and then were dragged through the newspapers. So all in all, I am really happy with my life at the moment. Obviously, I do things other than LBC. I do quite a bit of television now. I've got a book out at the moment, which has been a great experience to do. So I don't have regrets, even though I know I would have really liked to have done the MP job.
I actually read your recent book, and we'll come on to that in a moment. It's a really interesting read. I've actually been listening to it on Audible. Well, when you was running Bite Back Publishing, you've published over 600 books. You were MD of the company. You founded it. What was the biggest challenge of working in the publishing industry, and especially that of political literature?
Money.
Right. Yeah.
Well, it's cash flow. I mean, a lot of your listeners will completely understand that. Cash flow is the most important thing to any company. And if you run a bookshop or a publishing company, it's always going to be tight. And I started Politicos in 1997 with £20,000, and I borrowed £40,000 from friends and family. But to start a business like that with only £60,000 of capital, with virtually no working capital, was mad. And I vowed never to do that again. So when I started Bite Back, Michael Ashcroft, Lord Ashcroft, was our main investor. And he was really good because he was very hands-off. He didn't try and influence the company in any way. He provided the starting capital. And of course, we started up right at the worst point where we were in the start of the recession. So getting advertising for the magazine was incredibly difficult. So we didn't really become profitable until about late 2011, 2012. And at that point, he also owned Dodds, the parliamentary publishers, and they wanted to take over Total Politics. And I was given a choice to whether I would allow that to happen. And I did. In retrospect, I think that was a mistake, because I knew that they would probably shut it down within a very short time, because it was competition for one of their publications. And they kept it going online, but they actually shut down the print magazine. And I'm not sure in retrospect whether that was the right thing for me to do. So I then concentrated on the book publishing side, which again did quite well. I mean, book publishing is a very, very dicey industry, particularly for smaller independent publishers, and cash flow was always a challenge. But I kind of got a kick out of managing the cash flow, if I'm honest.
Why? It's not something that's for everyone. It's
no, it isn't. And you see, I'm not a financial person. I'm not an accountant. I don't even want to understand accountancy. I can just about make my way through a balance sheet, but it doesn't. That part of it doesn't excite me. But I remember at Politico's, where we were on a knife edge, basically for the whole time, and I would have an Excel spreadsheet of each of the companies that we owed money to, all of the companies that owed money to us, and it was literally firefighting the whole time. But somehow that gave me, maybe I'm a masochist, I don't know, that gave me some sort of perverse satisfaction to be able to manage it, and we did manage it. I do remember the bailiffs turning up one day though, and that was for actually something that I had paid, but convincing them wasn't the easiest thing. But
cash flow is one of the hardest things when it comes to starting a business. I like you, I've managed to I've built up a multi-million-pound business, but figures, academia, things like that have never been my strong point. I'm good at making money, but when it comes to balance sheets and taxes and anything like that, that's not my forte. I think as a personality profile, I'm an influencer, not a detail person. And I think personality profiling has been really helpful for my business.
yeah.
When you've hired people to work for you in the past, what is it you kind of assess someone on? Do you sort of follow your gut? Do you have a way of looking at people or assessing them?
I'm afraid to admit that I make up my mind about someone within 30 seconds of meeting them.
Right.
Well, let me qualify that. I usually decide whether I think that they've got a chance or not of getting the job. And I find it very easy to weed out the definite no's. There's only once where I've really been undecided over an appointment. Most of the time I'm fairly decisive. In 2010, when I got the LBC job, I thought I need a PA because I'm trying to run Bite Back and do the LBC job. I need a PA.
Mm-hmm.
So I advertised thinking that it'd be actually quite difficult to get one, but I had 60 people apply, which I was astonished at. And it came down to 2 people. And one of them was a guy that I'd met at a Tory party conference the year before. He was 17 from a Newport council estate.
Mm-hmm.
But there was just, sometimes you meet people and you think they've got something. I can't define what it is, but there's just something about them that is different. And he fell into that category. And there was another candidate who worked in a theatre in Liverpool. So 2 very different personalities. And I interviewed them both twice and I just couldn't make up my mind. So I got my partner to interview them. I got my business partner to interview them. In the end, I went with my gut, and his name was Grant Tucker. He's now entertainment editor for the Sunday Times at the age of 27.
Wow.
And he's the best networker that I've ever met. And he was just brilliant. I mean, he wasn't... he did start a university course at the same time, but he decided not to drop out, but delay it. I don't think he's ever gone back and finished it, actually. But he's one of these people who has got the gift of the gab.
Yeah.
I remember he walked up to Cilla Black in the street once and engaged her in conversation. She ended up taking him to tea at the Dorchester. John Major came to a book launch in the office. And he started talking to Grant, and then an hour later he left, and then he came back and he said, "Oh, I didn't say goodbye to Grant." So you got a former prime minister sort of feeling beholden to this sort of 18-year-old from Newport. I mean, he's just a real character, and I know one day he's going to be a massive TV star. I think he's just got that sort of thing about him. So. But I always remember talking to the former managing director of Associated British Ports once, where I had appointed a bookshop manager, and I had to sack him after a month because he was so awful and useless. And I was bemoaning this to guy Stuart Bradley, his name was, and so how did I misjudge that? I can't believe that I appointed someone who was so useless. And he said, "Well, don't blame yourself." He said, "If I get 1 in 3 right, I think I'm doing a good job." And I thought, well, that's interesting. And you're not going to get it right every time. But I do think you can't let things just carry on as they are. You have to grip it. And it's the hardest thing I've really ever had to do in business is to sack somebody, and I've had to do it on a few occasions. Never gets easier, and anybody that
No,
says
it's not.
that they can just do it, I think they're a bit warped, because it is a horrible thing to have to do.
Well, like you, I took on my PA actually straight from school, and she's been with me now 4.5 years, and is absolutely fantastic. I think the ability to mould someone from a young age, and even the apprenticeship scheme is a great scheme, and you can find great people through that. With communication, you're obviously the book you published in August, Why Can't We All Get Along? I think when you strip it down, does talk a lot about communication. Tying this back to my question, do you think the younger generation of today lack the social skills of older generations, despite the fact we're more connected than ever?
I think it's very difficult to generalize. There are lots of young people who would fall into that category, but I'm sure they did in 2000. I'm sure they did in 1980. I think actually nowadays you find that I'm constantly inspired when I interview sort of 18, 20-year-olds on the radio about what they're doing, and think, well, would they have been able to even do a radio interview 20 years ago? I'm not so sure. I think they're much more media savvy. They're much more comfortable with a camera in front of their face, for obvious reasons, with social media and the fact that everyone has a camera phone nowadays and can make videos and all the rest of it. I don't think you can really generalize like that.
I wanted to talk to you about LGBT matters. It's something that you're very open about on the radio. I don't think it's something you necessarily push across, but if asked, it's something that you do bring up. In 2003, you became the first openly gay Conservative candidate to contest the parliamentary election.
No, that's not true.
Oh, okay.
You have.
Correct.
It's important, because some people
Right.
have accused me of sort of overclaiming here. And
Okay.
what I've always said was that I was the first person to be selected to be a Conservative candidate, having previously told the selection committee that I was gay. I wasn't the first gay person to stand for the Conservatives, but it is a slightly different thing.
Okay. Did you feel support throughout the party when that happened? And
Yes, absolutely. Theresa May, who was the chairman of the party at the time, she phoned me up immediately after the selection. She had made it her business to get a more diverse range of candidates, which didn't just mean gay candidates, but more from ethnic minorities, more female candidates, and I was part of that. I think I actually benefited from that in a strange way, certainly from the top. It was possibly different at a local constituency level. So I did have the support from the party. But when you're the first to do anything, inevitably you become an object of curiosity. So
yeah.
I knew that the media would report it, and sure enough they did, which didn't do me any great favors locally. And I knew that, I mean, I was described by the Observer, of all papers, as the openly gay Conservative candidate. And I took the journalist to task for this. I said, you'd never write the openly straight Labour candidate or whatever. I said, I think it's a real disgrace that you do that, because yes, I don't mind you mentioning the fact that I'm gay, but to do it in those terms, I just thought was slightly gratuitous. And I never hid I mean, part of the reason that I hadn't stood before, and I was 40 years old at this point, part of the reason that I hadn't stood before was because I wasn't willing to be open about it. I hadn't come out to my parents. But I thought, well, if I don't start doing this now at the age of 40, it's going to be too late. So I can remember, and I've told this story before, so I won't go on at length, but I can remember when I got through to the second round of my first selection in Chipping Barnet, I remember driving up the M11 to see my parents to tell them. And I was thinking, I don't know how I'm going to do this. I don't know what I'm going to say.
Right.
And it was, I mean, I wish I'd done it many years before in retrospect, but you can't live your life over again.
Do you think being gay has in any way shaped or had an impact, either positively or negatively, throughout your career, impacted on your career?
I have said in the past that I think if I had been straight, I would have been an MP, and I do believe that. Now that is not that's not to say that I would automatically have been selected somewhere else, but I think I would have been. I think I would have got a safe seat, which means that I probably would have been an MP as well now. But as I say, I don't live by regrets. I'll always remember, just after I was selected, a very young guy came up to me at the Tory conference that year and said, I just wanted to thank you. And I thought, well, I don't know you. What are you thanking me for? And he said, because you've made it easier for the rest of us. And I do think that I did. And if that's my only achievement in politics, well, so be it. But I think if you look at the makeup of not just the Conservative Party, but Parliament at the moment, there are, I think, over 60 out MPs across the parties, more in the Tory party than anywhere else. That was unthinkable in those days. And I do think that the more people, and it wasn't just me, but there was like Nick Bowles stood in that election and quite a few others. It just made it a non-issue. And I just don't think it's an issue for selection committees now. I mean, I remember in that Chipping Barnet one, at the end of the first round of the selection, the woman in charge of the meeting said, "Is there anything embarrassing about your business or private life that could cause embarrassment to the local party?" And I just said, "Well, you should know that I'm gay, but I'm also a West Ham United supporter. I don't know which might be more embarrassing." And they all laughed. But the agent rushed out after me at the end and he said, "Why did you say that? You've just lost 2 votes there." And I said, "Well, they asked me a question, so I thought I'd answer it."
Which one did you lose 2 votes for? Was it
Well,
West Ham or being gay?
That is a very good question to which we'll never know the answer.
Right.
But in the final round, before the final, I missed out getting into the final by 2 votes. And had I got into the final, I would have been up against 2 women. And in those days, if it was one bloke against 2 women, invariably the bloke always won. So I do look back and think slightly, what if? I could have been Theresa Villiers. There you go.
Do you think in 2020 there's still a lot that needs doing in terms of diversity in the workplace?
I think certainly in terms of racial diversity, there is. I'm sure there are some sectors where it's still more difficult for gay people. Less so in metropolitan centres. I think the legal profession and the banking profession are starting to be better in terms of diversity, in terms of gay people. So there's always more to do. I think in politics and the media and the arts in general, I think you could almost argue there was an overrepresentation of gay people, if such a thing is even possible. I don't know. Nobody really knows what percentage of the population is gay anyway. Some people say 5%, some people say 10. I've no idea. So the fact that there are about 10% of MPs now, you could say, well, okay, job done. But I'm not sure we should look at it like that. But in terms of racial diversity, I think that is the challenge, because if you apply for a job in a professional environment and your name is Undabaningi, I suspect your chances of getting an interview are rather inferior to those if you were called John Smith. And that's wrong.
Well, I'm working in the recruitment sector myself, especially in legal. I think the legal sector is draconian. It is behind on the times. It is starting to wake up to these issues. There is promotion of these things, but sometimes there's positive discrimination where firms are going on a recruitment drive just to appeal to those people. So it can go so far the other way as well.
Yeah.
What I guess, kind of moving on, because we're running out of time now. I could talk to you all day long, Iain. It's really interesting. Do you have success habits? Is there things that you practice every day which you think, help to make you successful? Some people meditate, some people, work out. Is there things you do every day that you think drive your success?
Absolutely nothing.
Right. Okay.
No, I am a bit of a workaholic. If I'm watching television, I've got my laptop open and I'm doing stuff on it. I like lists. I don't know. I just like to be. I wrote a few weeks ago. I do a weekly newsletter to people who just are interested in what I'm up to. And if you want to sign up, go to iandale.com. And I started off by these words. I said, I think I've lost the art of doing nothing. And I genuinely think I have. I can't just sit down and watch television and watch a box set. I can't just sit down and read a book. I only read in bed, which means that I only read about 3 pages a night before I fall asleep. I used to be a voracious reader. I love watching lots of box sets, but it's very rare that I will sit and watch something without doing. I've got back into cricket recently. So I've been watching the different test matches, but I'm doing something while I'm watching. I like playing golf, but I found over the years I've only got a 9-hole attention span. get bored after 9 holes, even if I'm playing really well. I think, I don't know whether
Yeah.
I want to do 18, so I either quit after 9 or 12 or something.
I'm very similar to that. I think it's one of the. I think it's obviously because you've got this passion and you love what you do. I'm guessing that's a big driving force in what continues to keep you going.
I think that, yes, I am quite passionate about what I do. And because I've got to a stage now where virtually everything I do, I really enjoy, I've always got something to do. And I can't remember the last time I thought, oh, what shall I do now? Which is kind of sad. I mean, it's good, but it's also a little bit sad, I think. The thought of, I mean, I would love to go on a 2-week holiday and leave my phone and computer behind. Could I do it? Not so sure.
Listeners of LBC couldn't have you going for that long.
Well, that is true, because the management hate you going on holiday, because they think, well, if you're on holiday, the listeners might drift off to another radio station and then not come back. So there's always the pressure to not go away for too long. And I've only had, I mean, bearing in mind with COVID and everything, I've only had 1 week off this year so far. And I haven't felt, normally when I get to July, I feel a bit stressed out, a bit tired. I know when I need a break. But having broadcast from home for over 4 months, it felt like a 4-month holiday to me, if I'm honest. I mean, I'm sitting here now recording this with you in my bedroom using the microphone that I used to do the program on. And most people didn't even realize I wasn't in the studio. So
I did one time when your internet kept dropping out. Actually, I do remember one distinct episode.
I think there were 3 occasions in 90 programs where we had a problem, and that one of them was actually potentially awful, because it was in the mental health hour, and I was talking to a man who was saying he was thinking of killing himself, and the line went. And
time for the internet to drop down. That's not.
Yeah, absolutely. So it took me 2 minutes to dial back in, and I just typed on the screen to my producer Robbie, "I'm back." And luckily Emma Kenny she's with us all the time to give professional advice. Obviously, I'm not qualified to do that. And when I came back, she was talking to the guy, and they didn't even know that I'd gone.
I'm not sure what that says. We're running out of time. Just lastly, Iain.
It's a podcast. You can go on for as long as you like.
I can do. That's also true. I'm thinking more for your sanity, because I've got about another 5 pages of questions here. But someone starting out in business, or someone that's just maybe leaving school thinking they want to either go into the world of politics, media, or just starting a business, what advice would you give to young people? We have a lot of graduates and young people who listen to this particular podcast.
I think if you're starting a business, you've got to be sure that your idea is a sustainable one. And you've got to take advice. You may think that you've got the best idea since Kingdom Come, but there may be others out there who've got there before you that you haven't quite realized. And if you don't have a business background, you've got to kind of get the confidence you can actually run a business, because there are lots of people out there with good ideas who are very good marketeers, very good salespeople, but don't know the ins and outs of running a business. In some ways, it's common sense. But there are lots of tricks of the trade to learn as you go along. You kind of need a few mentors, I think. Talk to people who've been there, done that. Doesn't matter how old they are, they will all have experiences that they can share with you to make sure that you don't make the same mistakes that they did. So it depends what kind of business it is, I suppose. If you're starting a manufacturing business, I've never done that, but there are things that you need to know which you wouldn't if you were starting a retail business or a service sector business. But the one thing, and this is what everybody will say, is cash flow is king. If you go into a business with that one thing in the back of your mind all the time, and make sure that you have enough startup capital. I think that was the mistake that I've made on several occasions, not to have enough startup money. I've invested, a friend of mine started a forestry machinery business, and I've made an investment in that. And he's just turned 29, started it when he was 26. And I think it's been really useful to have me there to ask questions of. I'm just at the end of the phone. So he rang me up the other day and said, "Look, I've got all this money outstanding. Do you think I should be should I start charging interest and on sort of bad debts?" And so we had a long conversation about how he should chase bad debts, because that's always one of the most difficult. Well, not necessarily bad debts, but people who had just gone over the 30 days or whatever, or 60 days. So I think having someone there, so because it can be a very lonely experience. People who've never run a business don't get that. The biggest responsibility I felt, certainly at Biteback, was to all my staff, because I knew that any wrong decision I made could jeopardize, well, 12, 15, 20 jobs. And that does weigh on your mind, because
It's a heavy weight on your shoulders.
Well, people think that anyone who runs a business can be very harsh, uncaring, and all the rest of it. All they're in it for is for the money that they can get out of it. And of course, there are people like that. But I think most employers, particularly for small companies, they recognize that their employees are their biggest strengths. And if you treat your staff well, they will treat you well. They will go that extra mile. They will stay till midnight one night to get something finished, if it means that the company can make a bit more money out of it, because they know that in the end they will be rewarded for it. This is where I hate these companies that think that they can get the best out of people just by paying minimum wage. They should be grateful for a job. I'm sorry, that is not how you motivate people.
It's not, no. I totally agree with you. I think what you're saying about having a mentor is totally right. I think if you're a young person and you are starting out a business, I remember when I started my business, what used to fill me with absolute dread was the tax side of things, knowing how to start a business. And actually, I was with a partner at the time, and he was knew all about business, the accounting. And the day just before my company was about to launch and I opened it on Company's House, he moved all this stuff out and broke up with me. And it was like my world was tipped upside down, because I thought, can I actually have that inner strength to know how to do any of this?
What a bastard.
I know. If you're listening now, shame on you. Anyway.
But you bounced back from that in the way that I was saying before, presumably.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. Iain, it's been so nice to talk to you. I think it's been such an interesting conversation. And for anyone that wants to hear Iain, he's on LBC Monday to Thursday, 7 to 10 p.m. And is there any last things you would say to anyone out there that's listening to this, Iain, that's thinking about a career, maybe just one line of advice before we leave you?
I think
you on the spot.
Well, two things. First of all, try and go for it. I mean, there are so many people in this world who get to 60 and think, oh, if only I had had the courage of my convictions, if only I had tried that. The worst you can do is fail. And failure can seem awful at the time, but you learn from every failure. And there is a difference between the United States and us here, where most business people in the United States have had business failures. Here, if you have had a business failure, people look down on you and think, oh, well, loser. And it shouldn't be like that, because most entrepreneurs have more than one idea. And if one doesn't work, then they go on to the next one. And in the end, that's why risk has to be rewarded. And that's one of the things that I don't think this Conservative government quite understands, that if they remove all the incentives from entrepreneurs, they will go and set up businesses elsewhere. It's as simple as that. So I think if you have a dream, try and fulfill it. And I know it's easier said than done, but if you have the determination, you probably will be able to get at least some way towards it. And the second thing I would say is to buy my book, Why Can't We All Just Get Along, Shout Less, Listen More. I mean, it's primarily about public discourse, but there's quite a bit of autobiographical stuff in it. I do talk about the business world and why we don't appreciate business in the way that we should. I talk about some of my own businesses. I mean, I've run 7 over the years. And so far, touch wood, it's had quite a good reception.
It has. It's also available audiobook as well for anyone that's
I don't do audiobooks, but loads of people say that's how they've listened to it. But other people have said they've read the book and they can hear me reading it while they're reading it, if you see what I mean. They can hear my voice in it, which I thought was the nicest thing anyone could say.
Well, I've had you with my headphones in on my jog here.
Have you really?
So, yes, indeed. Listen, thank you so much for joining me. It's been an absolutely delight to talk to you. And that's it for this week on the Career Success Podcast. Iain, thank you.
Thank you.